A fair-haired boy lowered himself down some rocks toward a lagoon on a beach. At the lagoon, he encountered another boy who was chubby, intellectual, and wore thick glasses. The fair-haired boy introduced himself as Ralph, and the chubby one introduced himself as Piggy. Through their conversation, we learned that in the midst of a war, a transport plane carrying a group of English boys was shot down over the ocean. It crashed in thick jungle on a deserted island. Scattered by the wreck, the surviving boys lost each other and couldn't find the pilot. Ralph and Piggy looked around the beach, wondering what had become of the other boys from the plane. They discovered a large, cream-colored conch shell, which Piggy realized could be used as a kind of makeshift trumpet. He convinced Ralph to blow through the shell to find the other boys. Summoned by the blast of sound from the shell, boys started to straggle onto the beach. The oldest among them were around 12. The youngest were around 6. Among the group was a boys' choir, dressed in black gowns and led by an older boy named Jack. They marched to the beach in 2 parallel lines, and Jack snapped at them to stand at attention. The boys taunted Piggy and mocked his appearance and nickname. The boys decided to elect a leader. The choir boys voted for Jack, but all the other boys voted for Ralph. Ralph won the vote, although Jack clearly wanted the position. To placate Jack, Ralph asked the choir to serve as the hunters for the band of boys and asked Jack to lead them. Mindful of the need to explore their new environment, Ralph chose Jack and a choir member named Simon to explore the island, ignoring Piggy's whining requests to be picked. The 3 explorers left the meeting place and set off across the island. The prospect of exploring the island exhilarated the boys, who felt a bond forming among them as they played together in the jungle. Eventually, they reached the end of the jungle, where high, sharp rocks jutted towards steep mountains. The boys climbed up the side of one of the steep hills. From the peak, they could see that they were on an island with no signs of civilization. The view was stunning, and Ralph felt as though they had discovered their own land. As they traveled back toward the beach, they found a wild pig caught in a tangle of vines. Jack, the newly appointed hunter, drew his knife and stepped in to kill it, but hesitated, unable to bring himself to act. The pig freed itself and ran away, and Jack vowed that the next time he would not flinch from the act of killing. The 3 boys made a long trek through dense jungle and eventually emerged near the group of boys waiting for them on the beach. When the explorers returned, Ralph sounded the conch shell, summoning the boys to another meeting on the beach. He told the group that there were no adults on the island and that they needed to organize a few things to look after themselves. Jack reminded Ralph of the pig they found trapped in the vines in the jungle, and Ralph agreed that they would need hunters to kill animals for meat. Ralph declared that, at meetings, the conch shell would be used to determine which boy had the right to speak. Whoever held the conch shell would speak, and the others would listen silently until they received the shell in their turn. Jack agreed with this idea. Piggy yelled about the fact that no one knew they had crashed on the island and that they could be stuck there for a long time. The prospect of being stranded for a long period was too harrowing for many of the boys, and the entire group became silent and scared. One of the younger children, a small boy with a mulberry-colored mark on his face, claimed that he had seen a snake-like beastie or monster the night before. A wave of fear rippled through the group at the idea that a monster might be prowling the island. Though they were frightened, the older boys tried to reassure the group that there was no monster. The older boys said that the little boy's vision was only a nightmare. Thinking about the possibility of rescue, Ralph proposed that the group build a large signal fire on top of the island's central mountain so that any passing ships might see the fire and know that someone was trapped on the island. Excited by the thought, the boys rushed off to the mountain while Ralph and Piggy lagged behind. Piggy continued to whine about the childishness and stupidity of the group. The boys collected a mound of dead wood and used the lenses from Piggy's glasses to focus the sunlight and set the wood on fire. They managed to get a large fire going, but it quickly died down. Piggy angrily declared that the boys needed to act more proficiently if they wanted to get off the island, but his words carried little weight. Jack volunteered his group of hunters to be responsible for keeping the signal fire going. In their frenzied, disorganized efforts to rekindle the fire, the boys set a swath of trees ablaze. Enraged at the group's reckless disorganization, Piggy told them furiously that one of the littlest boys, the same boy who told them about the snake beast, was playing over by the fire and now was missing. The boys were crestfallen and shocked, and Ralph was struck with shame. They pretended that nothing had happened. Carrying a stick sharpened into a makeshift spear, Jack trailed a pig through the thick jungle, but it evaded him. Irritated, he walked back to the beach where he found Ralph and Simon at work building huts for the younger boys to live in. Ralph was irritated because the huts kept falling down before they were completed, and because, though the huts were vital to the boys' ability to live on the island, none of the other boys besides Simon would help him. As Ralph and Simon worked, most of the other boys splashed about and played in the lagoon. Ralph griped that few of the boys were doing any work. He said that all the boys acted excited and energized by the plans they made at meetings, but none of them was willing to work to make the plans successful. Ralph pointed out that Jack's hunters had failed to catch a single pig. Jack claimed that although they had so far failed to bring down a pig, they would soon have more success. Ralph also worried about the smaller children, many of whom had nightmares and were unable to sleep. He told Jack about his concerns, but Jack, still trying to think of ways to kill a pig, was not interested in Ralph's problems. Ralph, annoyed that Jack, like all the other boys, was unwilling to work on the huts, implied that Jack and the hunters were using their hunting duties as an excuse to avoid the real work. Jack responded to Ralph's complaints by commenting that the boys wanted meat. Jack and Ralph continued to bicker and grew increasingly hostile toward each other. Hoping to regain their sense of camaraderie, they went swimming together in the lagoon, but their feelings of mutual dislike remained and festered. In the meantime, Simon wandered through the jungle alone. He helped some of the younger boys, whom the older boys had started to call little uns, reach fruit hanging from a high branch. He walked deeper into the forest and eventually found a thick jungle glade, a peaceful, beautiful open space full of flowers, birds, and butterflies. Simon looked around to make sure that he was alone, then sat down to take in the scene, marveling at the abundance and beauty of life that surrounded him. Life on the island soon developed a daily rhythm. Morning was pleasant, with cool air and sweet smells, and the boys were able to play happily. By afternoon, though, the sun became oppressively hot and some of the boys napped, although they were often troubled by bizarre images that seemed to flicker over the water. Piggy dismissed these images as mirages caused by sunlight striking the water. Evening brought cooler temperatures again, but darkness fell quickly, and nighttime was frightening and difficult. The little uns, who spent most of their days eating fruit and playing with one another, were particularly troubled by visions and bad dreams. They continued to talk about the beastie and feared that a monster hunted in the darkness. The large amount of fruit that they ate caused them to suffer from diarrhea and stomach ailments. Although the little uns' lives were largely separate from those of the older boys, there were a few instances when the older boys tormented the little uns. One vicious boy named Roger joined another boy, Maurice, in cruelly stomping on a sandcastle the little uns had built. Roger even threw stones at one of the boys, although he did remain careful enough to avoid actually hitting the boy with his stone. Jack, obsessed with the idea of killing a pig, camouflaged his face with clay and charcoal and entered the jungle to hunt, accompanied by several other boys. On the beach, Ralph and Piggy saw a ship on the horizon, but they also saw that the signal fire had gone out. They hurried to the top of the hill, but it was too late to rekindle the flame, and the ship did not come for them. Ralph was furious with Jack, because it was the hunter's responsibility to see that the fire was maintained. Jack and the hunters returned from the jungle, covered with blood and chanting a bizarre song. They carried a dead pig on a stake between them. Furious at the hunter's irresponsibility, Ralph accosted Jack about the signal fire. The hunters, having actually managed to catch and kill a pig, were so excited and crazed with bloodlust that they barely heard Ralph's complaints. When Piggy shrilly complained about the hunter's immaturity, Jack slapped him hard, breaking one of the lenses of his glasses. Jack taunted Piggy by mimicking his whining voice. Ralph and Jack had a heated conversation. At last, Jack admitted his responsibility in the failure of the signal fire, but never apologized to Piggy. Ralph went to Piggy to use his glasses to light a fire, and at that moment, Jack's friendly feelings toward Ralph changed to resentment. The boys roasted the pig and the hunters danced wildly around the fire, singing and reenacting the savagery of the hunt. Ralph declared that he was calling a meeting and walked down the hill toward the beach alone. As Ralph walked along the beach, he thought about how much of life is an improvisation and about how a considerable part of one's waking life is spent watching one's feet. Ralph was frustrated with his hair, which was now long, mangy, and always managed to fall in front of his eyes. He decided to call a meeting to attempt to bring the group back into line. Late in the evening, he blew the conch shell and the boys gathered on the beach. At the meeting place, Ralph gripped the conch shell and berated the boys for their failure to uphold the group's rules. They had not done anything required of them. They refused to work at building shelters. They did not gather drinking water. They neglected the signal fire, and they did not even use the designated toilet area. He restated the importance of the signal fire and attempted to allay the group's growing fear of beasts and monsters. The little ones in particular were increasingly plagued by nightmare visions. Ralph said there were no monsters on the island. Jack likewise maintained that there is no beast, saying that everyone gets frightened and it is just a matter of putting up with it. Piggy seconded Ralph's rational claim, but a ripple of fear ran through the group nonetheless. One of the little ones spoke up and claimed that he had actually seen a beast. When the others pressed him and asked where it could hide during the daytime, he suggested that it might come up from the ocean at night. This previously unthought of explanation terrified all the boys, and the meeting plunged into chaos. Suddenly, Jack proclaimed that if there is a beast, he and his hunters will hunt it down and kill it. Jack tormented Piggy and ran away, and many of the other boys ran after him. Eventually, only Ralph, Piggy, and Simon were left. In the distance, the hunters who had followed Jack danced and chanted. Piggy urged Ralph to blow the conch shell and summon the boys back to the group, but Ralph was afraid that the summons would be ignored and that any vestige of order would then disintegrate. He told Piggy and Simon that he might relinquish leadership of the group, but his friends reassured him that the boys need his guidance. As the group drifted off to sleep, the sound of a little lun crying echoed along the beach. As the darkness fell late that night, Ralph and Simon carried a little lun back to the shelter before going to sleep. While the boys slept, military airplanes engaged in fierce battles above the island. None of the boys saw the explosions and flashes in the clouds because the twins Sam and Eric, who were supposed to be keeping watch of the signal fire, had fallen asleep. During the battle, a parachutist drifted down from the sky and landed on the island, dead. His chute became tangled in some rocks and flapped in the wind, while his shape cast fearful shadows on the ground. His head seemed to rise and fall as the wind blew. When Sam and Eric woke up, they tended to the fire to make the flames brighter. In the flickering firelight, they saw the twisted form of the dead parachutist and mistook the shadowy image for the figure of the dreaded beast. They rushed back to the camp, woke Ralph and told him what they had seen. Ralph immediately called for a meeting, at which the twins reiterated their claim that a monster had assaulted them. The boys, electrified and horrified by the twins' claims, organized an expedition to search the island for monsters. They set out armed with wooden spears, and only Piggy and the little loons remained behind. Ralph allowed Jack to lead the search as the group set out. The boys soon reached a part of the island that none of them had ever explored before, a thin walkway that led to a hill dotted with small caves. The boys were afraid to go across the walkway around the ledge of the hill, so Ralph went to investigate alone. He found that although he had been frightened when with the other boys, he quickly regained his confidence when he explored on his own. Soon, Jack joined Ralph in the cave. The group climbed the hill, and Ralph and Jack felt the old bond between them rekindling. The other boys began to play games, pushing rocks into the sea, and many of them lost sight of the purpose of their expedition. Ralph angrily reminded them that they were looking for the beast and said that they must return to the other mountain so that they could rebuild the signal fire. The other boys, lost in whimsical plans to build a fort and do other things on the new hill, were displeased by Ralph's commands, but grudgingly obeyed. This is the end of part 1. If you liked what you heard, please like, comment, and subscribe. If you didn't like what you heard, thank you for watching this long. See you soon on Books Recapped.